If your concrete business has stopped growing, it's not random. It's because of one thing, and that's because you have a bottleneck. Your business will only grow to its weakest point, and then once you hit that ceiling, everything stalls waiting on that to be fixed before you can grow again. The problem though is if you don't have the right data or knowledge, identifying the weak point is almost impossible. So in this video, I'm gonna show you guys the system that I use in my concrete company that I identify weak points, which has allowed me to scale to $4 million, so hopefully you can do the same. So let's start off though, and real fast, just go over why this actually happens, and why it happens is called the theory of constraints. And here's what the theory of constraints is, and I'm gonna demonstrate this off a story that I have for you guys when I was first starting my business. So when I first got into my business, my father-in-law originally had a constraint, and his constraint to grow his business, because he was doing about $70,000 a year before I joined his business. And I remember I would meet him at the dinner table, and we would have family dinner every now and again. I'd ask him about his business, and I was like, hey, well, why don't you, instead of 70,000, like, why don't you just throw another zero on that thing and do 700,000? That sounds pretty cool. And then what he said is like, well, hey, Tyler, it's because I don't know how to sell and how to get more leads. Like, how do I get more leads? How do I sell more jobs? And that's when I identified the constraint. I was like, oh, well, the constraint is just you need marketing and sales. So it was very obvious at that point, right? And lo and behold, then when I joined the business, all of a sudden I come in, I bring the marketing, I bring the sales. And then immediately the next year we did $750,000. So we over 10x'd his business in 1 year just by knocking off one constraint. But then all of a sudden we had another constraint, right? That constraint after that was we're like, hey, we're making some money, but we wanted to make even more money. So we're like, well, how do we do that? We're like, well, if we did 750,000, then let's just do like even more. Like, let's just work even harder, do more jobs. And so that's what we did next year. We did more of the same, and we did 1.2 million the year after our first year. So on our second year when we were working together. But the crazy thing is, even though we did more revenue, we actually almost made no more money. And part of that was because we were losing efficiencies, right? We were having a second crew, we had more equipment, we had more business expenses. So that was an example where we thought that we were conquering a constraint, but in reality, we conquered the wrong constraint. We didn't actually even fix what we wanted to. And then to top it off, on our second year, not only did we do more revenue and barely make more money, but then we hit an even new constraint, which was our time, right? I was already working as hard as I possibly could. I was doing all the estimates, all the sales, all the invoicing, and even on top of that, I was working like 6 to 8 hours a day in the field on the actual crew. I didn't know how to do any concrete. I was just basically the labor. And my father-in-law, he's like, hey, Tyler, I can't really manage more work, man. Like, I'm like exhausted. I work all day. And so now all of a sudden our constraint was our time. And so then we had to figure out, right? Okay, so then if that is the case, right, our time is already constrained, and on top of that, our business isn't profitable enough to go and hire people to help take time off our plate. Well, now our constraint was actually our finances, which it was funny because after I look back over the long time, I realized that our initial constraint after year one at 700,000, it wasn't actually more revenue. It was that we needed to become more profitable before we grew. I just didn't know that, right? So that was an example where I basically spent a year trying to solve a constraint. In reality, I actually didn't, because my end goal of making more profit didn't actually come true. The very first constraint that I needed to solve was not do more, but to do better jobs for a better price, for instance. And what was funny is in the moment, I actually felt very screwed because I was sitting there. Like I said, we'd done $1.2 million. We weren't even that profitable. I was making money, but it wasn't enough to do anything. Like, I couldn't hire an office manager. I couldn't hire a salesperson. I couldn't do anything. I was like, I can't work harder. And I also don't have money to buy things. So like, what do I do? And so I've told this story many times, earlier in the channel, but I took like basically my last 5K and I hired a mentor, and he was doing $10 million at the time. And he answered like one thing for me, which was one of the most impactful things, is he helped me learn my numbers. And he's like, hey, Tyler, like, you don't actually need to do more. You just have to fix your pricing. Like, dude, you're just like charging too little. He actually like walked me through. We learned how to look at all my overhead, how to actually attribute overhead into my jobs. I realized that like half my jobs I was losing money on, which is like, lo and behold, why we weren't that profitable. Because if you charge per square foot, then you're doing it wrong. Which, speaking of which, I have videos on that. So if that's you, then check a video that I'm gonna leave in the comments so you can watch that after. But anyways, so he comes in, he shares this to me. Now that solves my real constraint, right? And my real constraint at the time was the pricing problem. Okay, so I fixed that problem. Now all of a sudden that gets me more profitable, and now I can scale my business to $2 million because I actually had budget to hire an office manager, right? So I raised my prices, I have more profit, I now could invest to take a little bit of time off my plate, hired an office manager, and then we grew to the next level. So business is just this constant game of finding what is the bottleneck. You have to figure out the right bottleneck, because oftentimes when you're in the heat of the moment, you actually don't know. So you have to find the right one. And when you solve that, then it unlocks this whole new level of growth, and then you scale to your next lowest spot. That is the theory of constraints. That's how it works. All right, so let's dive in on to actually solve these constraints, right? How do you solve these bottlenecks in your business? And what we discovered in my examples is what you don't want to do is guess. Number one, because when you guess, you might actually solve something in business, but it doesn't solve your real problem. Like how for me, when I went from 700,000 to 1.2 million, I thought my constraint was needing to be bigger, when in reality, I just had to fix my pricing first. That was the real constraint, okay? The other problem is as you get bigger in business, it actually becomes harder to identify your constraints. So imagine when I first talked to my father-in-law, he was only doing $70,000 a year. Then I went to him and was like, well, why don't you just do this more? And he's like, well, I just don't know how to do marketing and sales. And so it was a very easy to identify the constraint was like, well, we just need to like sell more jobs, right? But the thing is, as you get bigger in business, realize that things get more complicated. Number one is you get more overhead, right? Like you have truck payments, you have insurance, marketing, you have employees. You can't just afford to change the wrong things because now all of a sudden you have all this risk, right? You can't afford to make a wrong decision and have all these bills that you messed up on. And number two is the bigger you get, you have more people in the field you have to manage. You have more office people. You have more systems that are floating out, and it's harder and harder to actually keep track of each individual thing in your business. So even if you feel now, well, hey, Tyler, like that's cool that you say this, but I'm totally fine identifying my constraints, and I could just do that off the whim. I could just guess, and I'm like totally good. Just realize it may be easy now, but the bigger you get, the harder it is because you're going to become more disconnected just by nature because you're going to have more people doing things for your business that you can't actually be there to see yourself, right? Like you can't be everywhere at once. So how we actually solve constraints, how we actually find them is through data. So let me get into like how we actually do that. All right, so step one to identify what your constraint is you have to build a foundation of data first. And what I've noticed is a lot of people, they have P&L and they're like, oh, Tyler, I have clean books and I have a P&L. And that is what they have for data. But here's the problem with that is the P&L is all facing backwards, right? So say for instance, if you're like, hey, it's now the very beginning of 2025 and my accountants finally shot me my P&L for 2024 so I can see how much money I made. The problem with that is you're looking behind you, but not in front of you. Okay, so if you want a strong foundation on what you need to do to like identify constraints and also make sure that you're on track to hit your goals, is you need to do a P&L, but do it 12 months in advance, right? So that's what we do is we do what's called a projected P&L, where you have to have a system. And I teach a lot of our clients on our partner clients and also our marketing clients on how to actually do this. Because step one is just all about having a plan. Like, hey, how much revenue do I need to do? From that revenue, now we need to backtrack it, right? How many leads do I need, for instance, in order to do that? Like how many leads based on a certain closing percentage do I need in an average dollar amount? So without a lot of these metrics, which we call KPIs, key performance indicators, and if you're not doing that ahead of time, then how are you actually supposed to be looking in the moment if you're on track, if you don't even know what on track looks like? So here are some of the things that we track. Like I said, it's with marketing. How many leads do we need? What's the cost per lead, right? What should my marketing budget be based on how many leads that I'm gonna have that need to then go into my sales metrics, like my sales ratio, my average dollar per job. What about on the crew side? Right? Like what is your efficiency with bidding jobs? If you bid a job to take 100 hours, does it actually take you 100 hours to fulfill or does it take you 110, right? So all of these metrics, if you basically look at your business as this like big box of metrics, that's at the end of the day, all it really is, right? It's how many leads, how many of those leads do we sell? What is our price? How much gross profit do I make? And then what's the overhead on the back end? So that way I know how fast I need to basically get gross profit to pay off my business. And then step two, when you actually do that, right, you have all your targets, you know what you need to do. Now you break that down into a weekly number, okay? And then that's what we do. We break everything down into a weekly number. I know exactly how many leads that I need, how many sales that I need per week, what my close ratio should be. I know how many jobs that I need to do per week. And then I do what's called weekly scorecard meetings. That's where my team puts together data. We actually go in as a company, we look at the data together, and that's how we actually make our decisions. And so as you can imagine, right, if you have that type of data, all of a sudden decisions become very easy. Like for instance, me last year, we did a little under $3 million of work, which was a huge problem because we needed to do a lot more than that. But when we were looking at the data and going over it retroactively, which again, that's why I'm actually getting away from a lot of this stuff, looking retroactively at things, because I want to be proactive. I realized, I said, we got all of our metrics, and I looked at my sales close ratio. It was 9%. I said, whoa. I was like, if we just get our close ratio from 9% up to 15%, then we could have a 50% increase in our business just from that one stat alone. So a 5% increase in close rate is a 50% increase as far as our revenue. So now all of a sudden, when you know the problems in your business based on this data points, right, all of a sudden things become a lot easier to manage. All right, guys, so if you're stuck in your business, in short, you have a couple different things you need to do. Number one is you have to identify the constraint, figure out what's actually holding your business back that unlocks the next level, right? That's how you do that. But in order to get to that constraint, you have to have data. Data is what allows you to see into the problems of your business. Much like if you go to a doctor, in order for them to get you healthy, they run a blood test exam. They look at your blood based on what is wrong with your blood. Say, for instance, if you have low testosterone, they're like, well, no, duh, you're not feeling good. Your testosterone's off. Then they do a game plan to fix that, which will fix the rest of your problems, right? So business is very similar. And if you don't know how to do that your own, maybe you don't know actually how to run your numbers, run your KPIs, all that stuff, then we are actually partnering up with one concrete contractor per month. We'll actually fly out, learn from our team. We will actually go over a 12-month game plan, go over all your numbers, not only for right now, but also projecting the 12 months. So that way, if you hit all of your metrics that we'll actually track for you, then you will hit a certain income goal. If that sounds interesting, click the link down below in the description to learn more. That's all that I have for you guys in today's video. Make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you guys in the next one.